Hey friends, it's Gloria and welcome back to another video. Today is going to be my nonfiction November recommendations. Wonderful Olive from A Book Olive hosts this every year. It's my favorite time of year, and the initiative is to read more nonfiction books in the month of November. She gives 4 words, 4 prompts, 4 challenges. Really, you could read any nonfiction you want, but I always like to challenge myself, and so today's video is going to be some recommendations. I will have my TBR video coming down the line, so stay tuned for that. But today's just going to be my recommendations based on these 4 words. So the first word is record, and that could be interpreted in whatever kind of way. I have a few recommendations. The first one is an incredible nonfiction book, and that is The Only Plane in the Sky, An Oral History of 9/11 by Garrett M. Graff. This works for record because this is a play-by-play, a record of a bunch of different people and their perspectives and what happened on 9/11. This book is fantastic. It is heartbreaking. It is hard to read. I would highly recommend the audiobook paired with this. I've not heard a single person say a bad thing about this book, and it is definitely a challenging read for sure because the events of that day are horrendous and really hard to wrap your mind around, but the author did an incredible job cataloging that day, filling the pages with different people's experiences and what happened. If you haven't read it but it's on your radar, it works really well for record. For very similar reasons, Columbine by Dave Cullen also really works for record because this is a very detailed record of Columbine, which is a mass school shooting that happened in the US in the 1990s, and it is also incredibly hard to read. But again, the author Dave Cullen did a fantastic job of breaking down the day, giving different perspectives, giving the reader an understanding of why these events happened, the people that were affected, and everything that went down on that day in that school. Another recommendation for record is Know My Name by Chanel Miller. This is a book that is very well known, but I still will be recommending it. It was fantastic, and the audiobook was excellent because Chanel Miller narrates it herself, so her telling her own story just made it that much more impactful and moving. But this book works for record because Chanel Miller goes on the record and finally tells her story. She was only known as Jane Doe in a sexual assault case, and this book is her experience and everything that she went through and everything that was going on behind the scenes when all of these events were happening. It's a very public trial. I guess this is a theme from the last 2 as well, but again, really hard to read, hard topic around sexual assault, but so well done that it had to make its way on this recommendation list. And then a final recommendation for record. I actually read this book recently in the month of September, and that is A Fine Romance, Falling in Love with the English Countryside by Susan Branch. This was a beautiful travel diary scrapbook about a woman and her husband who visit the English countryside in 2012, and this book records that travel experience. The author handwrites the entire book and is a watercolor painter, so there is beautiful watercolor illustrations inside and photos from the trip. I just found this to be so heartwarming and wholesome and lovely, and if you just need a cozy read, this is it. Especially if you are a fan of travel or have any interest in traveling to England, this book will be right up your alley. The next word is element. Again, can be interpreted in many different ways. I immediately go to like the main 4 elements, and so my first recommendation is A Fire Story by Brian Fies. This is actually a graphic novel, and it was one of the first nonfiction graphic novels that I ever read, which opened up my world to nonfiction graphic novels, which I love to sprinkle into my reading now and again. In this graphic novel, Brian Fies tells the story of how he lost his home to the California wildfires in 2017 and the devastating effects of those wildfires and what it is like to lose your home, lose your belongings, deal with that turmoil and grief and tragedy and kind of the unknown of being someone in a natural disaster situation. This book read very journalistic in nature, which I really appreciated, and I just thought it was really well done. Fantastic artwork as well. Another recommendation for the word element is actually a cookbook technically. It is called Salt, Fat, Acid, Heat, Mastering the Elements of Good Cooking by Samin Nosrat. This was a fantastic cookbook. I paired the physical book alongside the audiobook, so I would actually recommend both. But Samin Nosrat does a fantastic job of breaking down the elements of cooking, specifically those 4 areas and how they affect your cooking. She explained what each of those things do, the importance of them, and then gave parameters as well as freedom for your home cook to figure out how to use certain elements to elevate a dish. And I just found it very helpful and encouraging and a very fun and unique cookbook. Moving on to the word border, I have 2 recommendations. The first one is The Ukrainian and Russian Notebooks by Igor. This is yet another graphic novel that I discovered in my nonfiction graphic novel section of the library, and I found this book very informative and helpful and foundational to understand some of the tension between Russia and Ukraine and some of the terrible things that has happened in Russia. This was not a perfect graphic novel. It was not extensive. It brought up a lot of events that some people aren't aware of, and it made me want to then go into a deeper dive on some of those. So I would say this graphic novel is maybe for those that are just unaware and want to learn a little bit more of some stuff that's happened. The next recommendation is another recent read of mine, actually in the month of September, and that is The Salt Path by Rainer Wynn. This was a beautiful memoir about a woman and her husband who experienced houselessness and also a diagnosis with a terminal illness, and they decide to set off on a 630-mile journey, which is a walk along the southwest coast path of England. And Wynn goes through that entire experience, the people they met along the way, the beautiful nature that they saw, dealing with the pain and turmoil of your life being uprooted and not knowing what is next, seeing your partner in pain and trying to help them. And I think it works for Border because they physically crossed some borders and had to tent and sleep in the wild. And then the last word is secret, and my goodness, I feel like I could fit in so many books into secret. One of my main recommendations though, and I'm gonna second a book Olive because she plans on reading this and I want to encourage her to do it, is Catch and Kill: Lies, Spies, and the Conspiracy to Protect Predators by Ronan Farrow. This works for Record because Ronan Farrow is a journalist, so he goes on Record to tell the story, but also works for Secret because this book is the uncovering of the Harvey Weinstein debacle and the start of the Me Too movement, and it was really well done. I also listened to the audiobook, which is narrated by Ronan Farrow. This book I would recommend for those that are interested to learn more about what happened with Harvey Weinstein, women coming forward who were experiencing sexual assault, all of the ickiness and horrible things that were going on behind the scenes of the Hollywood industry. This was really interesting and eye-opening. Another book that goes really well with Secret is The Hiding Place by Corrie ten Boom. This book is all about how Corrie ten Boom and her family hid Jews, kept them secret in their home in Amsterdam, and then eventually they were found out and her family was sent to concentration camps. She's the only one that survived. She tells the story of that experience, and it is heartbreaking and tragic, but also so filled with faith and hope. And I remember just reading this being so amazed at this woman and what she endured and went through. It was incredible. Another book recommendation for the word secret is Cultish: The Language of Fanaticism by Amanda Montell. I think cults in general and what goes on behind them is very much kept secret. I think the author does a good way of bringing understanding around cults and what makes a cult to the average person. Again, would recommend the audiobook of this one. It was a really fun, interesting listen. Made me analyze some things in my life in a different way, look at cults in a new way, and also made me want to do a deep dive in just reading more about cults because I found them very interesting. And then my final book recommendation is American Baby: A Mother, a Child, and the Shadow History of Adoption by Gabrielle Glasser. This was one of my favorite nonfiction books that I read last year. And this goes well with Secret because this book uncovers some of the secrecy behind the adoption industry, the sketchiness that went down, kind of the foundations of adoption in the US, and all of the horrible things that were going on behind the scenes of babies being taken away from young mothers. And this book mainly follows one man who discovered that he was adopted, goes on a hunt to try to find his birth mother, and uncovers the truth behind what happened there. It was not only very captivating and interesting nonfiction, but also very informative and eye-opening about adoption in general. So those are some of my recommendations for Nonfiction November coming up. Let me know if you agree with me. Have you read any of these, or have any of them now been added to your want to read list? Stay tuned for a video where I talk about the nonfiction books I plan on reading in the month of November. But until then, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in another book video soon. Bye!